Liebe Freundinnen, liebe Freunde des Personalwirtschaft-Podcasts, wieder einmal ist es Zeit für was Neues. Und zwar ist es eine kleine Serie, die wir mit unserem Partner Cornerstone aufgesetzt haben. Wir werden in 3 Folgen verschiedene HR-Themen und Trends uns genauer ansehen. Und heute schauen wir uns dieses Thema Skilling und Learning mal genauer an. Wir haben in den letzten Jahren viel über Reskilling und Upskilling geredet. Das war so eins der Trendthemen, die durch die Covid-Pandemie aufgekommen sind. Und heute bin ich sehr froh, jemanden in der Leitung zu haben. Er ist mir tatsächlich aus Las Vegas zugeschaltet. Ich bin froh, jemanden in der Leitung zu haben, der sich wirklich mit diesen Themen auskennt. Denn er leitet bei Cornerstone den internationalen Forschungsbereich, so könnte man sagen. Es ist das Cornerstone People Research Lab. Und Mike Bollinger, er hat über 20 Jahre Erfahrung in der HR-Szene, aber auch darüber hinaus. Er ist sozusagen eine ganz erfahrene Führungskraft in diesem Bereich und leitet eben seit einigen Jahren dieses People Research Lab. Und Mike hat uns Studienmaterial mitgebracht. Er hat 2020 zum ersten Mal eine große Skills-Studie aufgesetzt und 2022 diese Studie reproduziert und damit neue und ganz frische Daten aufgesetzt. Und ich werde jetzt gleich ins Englische überwechseln, denn Mike, wie gesagt, sitzt in Las Vegas. Dort ist es früh am Morgen. Hier ist es Nachmittag. Mike, I just said it's early in the morning where you are and it's afternoon here in Germany, but I'm very happy to have you. Welcome on our show.
Thank you. Apologies, I can't do it in German, so we'll be forced to do it in English.
Well, I'm totally convinced that we're going to be fine. His nickname, to let you guys know, is One Take Mike, so he does it in one take. Let's see whether I'm able to do it in one take here in English. Well, Mike, you have set up the Global Skills Report, right? And you've done it, I think, in 2020 first, and then in 2022. Well,
correct.
to repeat the whole study. Please let us first know, what is the report all about? How did you go about it? Who was interviewed? Let us know how the study went on, please.
So, and there was an adjustment to 2022, and we'll talk about it because that's really the interesting part for me. But in 2020, what we did was we set out to do a global skills research report. And it had 2 perspectives at the time. It had the employee perspective and the employer perspective. And it coincidentally was fielded just at the time that the pandemic hit. So we also had the opportunity to ask some pandemic questions at the same time. And what we found was the employees and employers felt pretty positive overall, for the most part, that the organizations were doing the best they could to respond. And that's important in any survey because you want to take a sentiment around that.
Yeah.
So then in 2020, what we found something really, really interesting between the 2 perceptions, which we call the skills confidence gap.
Yeah.
And what it was a 30-point gap between how the employees felt about consuming the investment that was being made in them from a development perspective and how the employers felt like they were making that investment. The difference of 30 points was statistically significant. So what we did in 2022 was we repeated that, but we added a new dimension, which we called the high-performing organization. So in 2022, 1,800 employees, roughly 900 employers, and we also added, and it was global, we also added the high-performing organization. And what we found was very interesting in that regard.
Yeah, let's talk about the high-performing organizations later on. Firstly, I want to just go back to the skills confidence gap. 30 points of difference in percentage, right, between those employers and the employees. So what the employers did and they thought was relevant for the employees didn't really reach the audience, right?
Well, so it's not an indictment, but rather a perception issue. And so
right.
What we did was we used, not to get too detailed on survey, but we used a 5-point Likert scale. We all know what that is. Everything from strongly disagree to strongly agree.
Exactly.
And we took the agree and strongly agree of the employer and the agree and strongly agree of the employee and compared them. And the questions really were around confidence. So from the employer perspective, I feel confident in our ability to develop the skills. And the employee's question was, I feel confident that my organization can develop my skills. And what we found was a 30-point gap in 2020. So what we did in 2022 was we re-asked that particular question, and the gap actually grew. It grew to 31%. But what was really interesting was the confidence level of both the employer and employee cohorts dropped. So it was 90% employer feeling confident in 2020, only 86% in 2022.
So how do you find this confidence? Like in what respect do you define confidence here?
Well, because the question is related to the perception of confidence for both cohorts, both the employer and the employee. What we're really comparing is their perception. The employers feel, do you feel confident that you're making an investment? And from an employee perspective, do you feel confident that you can consume that investment?
I see.
So then, you have a 31-point gap in the new report. But what was really interesting is adding the dimension of high performing organizations. That gap was only 11%. That's close to not. That's an alignment in perception. Whereas the laggard organizations, because we looked at both high performing and laggard organizations, it was a 48% gap. So this is an indicator or a symptom around developing your employees and how employees feel about your development.
Sure. Please give us an idea of how you define the high-performing organization.
So what we did was we took 16 different dimensions of the high-performing organization. And this is the really interesting part of it. And we included things like employee development and turnover and those things. But we also included revenue, profitability, agility, and so on. And we took those 16 dimensions and we created an index. And then I'm sure everybody's comfortable with the concept of a bell curve, right? You have those people on either end of the tail, and then you have the average in the middle. So on the right-hand side, we had the high performers. On the left-hand side, we had the laggards. And we did a lot of comparison in the report in that regard.
Okay, let's look into the comparisons. I see here, for example, the percentages in the report when you look at the employee ratings, and they are really like between the high performing organizations and the laggard organizations, they're strikingly different, right? When you look at, for example, employee training and development, it goes like 96% versus 76%, and you can read it on just like that. So the high performance are really different and outstanding in that regard, I guess.
It is, and that was actually the purpose of the report when we went and fielded the survey for the second report. I wanted to dig one level deeper. Okay, so we know we have this confidence gap. Let's dig a level deeper and find out where that confidence gap actually exists. And it exists in a variety of ways, whether it be quality of hire, whether it be the development itself, leadership development. That gap existed across all those dimensions. But what was really, really important in an era where we have, everybody is worried about keeping talent and finding people and all that, you can call it the Great Resignation or the Great Reprioritization, whatever you want to call it. What we found in the high-performing organization was that employees rated them incredibly high on the things that we all know matter. As a matter of fact, in high-performing organizations, employees rated the high-performing organization a level of confidence in being able to address their skills gaps one level deeper. Whereas at almost 100%, 99% of employees felt like the high-performing organizations could take action on closing those skills gaps. Only 51% of laggards felt that way. That's a striking difference and a real tribute to alignment between the employee and the employer and the outcomes that go with that.
Did you also have a look at like which skills are really needed now? Like which are the most like sought after skills in the job market and in the job qualifications?
The report itself didn't address that because we were trying to address a broader set of issues.
Okay.
However, there are some really good, significant pieces of research around that. One of those I like to talk about is the World Economic Forum, and they do a regular outcome of that. And if you look at the results of the World Economic Forum, and you look at their 2018 report that they then repeated, the top two skills for 2025 didn't even exist in the 2018 report.
Right.
The point of this is, as people, we know our skills are changing all the time. So what we examined in our skills report was what investment employers are making. And if they're making that investment, how well is it working? So I'll give you a good example around that. One of the things that we asked in 2020 of the employers was, hey, what is one of your top priorities? And half of them said skills and talent shortage. So in 2022, we said, we know that that's a priority for you. How have you started your investment? And what we found with high-performing organizations was that nearly 3/4 of them had already started or were starting within this year. Laggard organizations, only 10% had already started, and most of them were not looking to start within 3 years. So not only is that confidence of the employees and the employer's investment coming through, but in the laggard organizations, they're not answering the call to action.
I mean, there is shortage of talent and workers everywhere now, right? They're like everybody is saying like we need more people working for us, and I have the feeling, at least here in Germany, everybody is talking about recruiting. But in your report, you're talking about skill development and basically about retention and development of people, right? Do you also think that there is too much talk of recruiting going on? Well, there is too little talk of, skill development and development of people in general?
So this is a philosophical question.
Yeah,
but
maybe.
I truly believe, and one of the things that came out of the report, I truly believe that you should be looking internally first. And so one of the things that we did in the report was we said, for a high-performing organization, what are the things that high-performing organizations do differently? Okay. And there were 5 particular things that we talked about: focusing on future skills, integrating skill building with career development, creating a culture of skill building, offering personalized content to the skills, but primarily adopt an internal first hiring mindset. For high-performing organizations, that was the number one way they plan to fill skills gaps. And what we found also was that as a driver, it was a broad set of initiatives, not just a single one. So yes, I believe that you should start looking internally first and then look externally. And so high-performing organizations are aligned with the employees that they have. They're looking at them first for new roles, and they're creating an investment priority they're committing resources. And that's what this report demonstrated.
Then let's zoom into that a bit. Let's imagine the employee who says to his boss, I need a career move. I want to move on. Like, what would the high-performing organization offer that person? Is it like, in how far is it differently set up to answer to these requests?
So we asked that. We said, we had a question in there where we said, okay, how satisfied are you with the solutions? And what we found was that the high-performing organizations were satisfied with development solutions, not just technology, but the solutions that were being offered. So that was almost 100% of high-performing organizations. Laggards, only 10% were satisfied with what was being offered. So then we asked, if you wanted to look for a new role, what areas would you look to first? And I'll be honest with you, I thought the results were going to be, I went to Google, or I went out on the internet, or I asked my friends. And what we found really interesting when it came to high-performing organizations was an employee desire to look and ask internally first. They looked for internal mentors. And in high-performing organizations, half of them wanted to talk to their managers about career aspirations. In the laggard organizations, that was only 24%. So this is the investment that we want to make as employers in developing our first level and second level leaders to have those career development conversations goes hand in hand with the internal first hiring mindset.
Definitely. I'm just wondering because oftentimes it's the fact that the manager wants to keep their talent in the team, right? And
talent hoarding, yes,
exactly. So I mean, it's very. I mean, if you talk about it to your manager, you're always a bit dependent on how they're ticking in a way, how they're set up to answer to this. Do they want to keep the talent in their team to have their share of that talent, or do they want to sort of let it go free in the organization and flourish, if you will, right?
So interesting that you bring this up, and the reason I bring it, I mentioned that is last week was HR Tech in the United States.
Yeah.
And so I have regular conversations with analysts and so on.
Yeah.
And in one of the conversations, we started talking about talent hoarding, which is what we refer to when the managers don't want to promote people.
Mm-hmm.
And we talked a little bit about what are some of the remediations for that. If we're going to have an internal first hiring mindset, managers and the employees are looking to their managers, we got to prepare the managers. So I did find there's only really one good solid piece of university peer-reviewed research on this. But what it did find was when managers were involved in an internal first approach, actual fill rates went up. And if you're interested, I can find that link and send it to you later. But the conversation, although I don't have any other research around it, I do know anecdotally and have talked about talent hoarding for years. There's a couple of things that you need to do. First off, you need to celebrate any time a manager creates career results for their employees. That's the first thing. Mm-hmm. The second thing is it needs to be part of their remit. It needs to be part of how they're incented and how they're evaluated, so that career growth for their employees is part of the way that they're paid as well.
Yeah.
The third thing to do is to make an investment in those leaders around how to have those conversations. And then the fourth thing to do is recognize that might occur, because a lot of times managers will go, my goal is to hit these numbers in the organization, and if I lose employee number one and employee number two, I'm not going to hit those goals. It needs to be a balanced part of the organization, and the goals need to be less departmental and wider in terms of the organization itself. If you do those things, you'll find that you'll have less talent hoarding. I don't think you'll ever eliminate it, but if you incent managers to have those conversations, I believe internal mobility is a part of the overall result. And candidly, after that conversation last week, I want to do that. I want to do the talent hoarding research next year. I want to look at that. I'm looking forward to that.
It's totally interesting, and I think if COVID has brought up something, then also a new perspective on how important leadership is in general, and then also when it comes to talent management and talent development. Something that I think is very, very important to know for our listeners here is that you also found really a strong, I'm quoting here, a strong positive correlation between providing support and opportunity for employees and the overall business performance of an organization.
Yes.
I'm just briefly putting this in German, because this is really, really important. Je mehr und je stärker man die Mitarbeitenden unterstützt und ihnen Möglichkeiten zur eigenen Entfaltung bietet, desto größer ist der Effekt auf die Business Performance des Unternehmens. So this is really striking, isn't it?
It is. And remember, if you go back to those 16 dimensions that we laid out for the high-performing organization, we included things like profitability, revenue growth, agility, and agility means new markets as well as innovation, as well as some of the HR benchmarks. So if you look at across the board at everything from leadership development, quality of hire, to internal mobility, and you compare that to the 16 dimensions of business results, the difference is staggering between the laggard organizations and the high-performing organizations, significantly.
Yeah. And another sentence that struck me is that you wrote, using reskilling as a catch-all term for skills development is problematic. Yeah, because this also here in Germany with COVID coming up, suddenly everybody was talking about reskilling and upskilling. These two terms were totally technical HR terms before. Yeah, not used in the broader sense. And then since 2020, everybody was talking about reskilling. Yeah. So you're saying it's problematic just to use it as a catchphrase, basically.
Well, it is, and there's a couple of reasons for it. And I had done a different piece of research the prior year on what we called new skilling.
Mm-hmm.
So words matter, all right? They matter to employees and its perception. And when you say upskilling, you're implying that the employee doesn't have the right skills or doesn't do well at those skills. When you talk about reskilling, you're implying that the employee needs a different set of skills other than the ones that they have. Both of those have a connotation to the employee. We're already afraid as people that our skills are atrophying, that they're changing and so on. Yeah. So I assume, and in this other report that we did, we use the word new skilling because candidly, that's what's happening. Skills are changing all the time. And so what we need to do as people is we need to learn how to learn, because what to learn is always changing. Okay. Yeah. And so reskilling and upskilling is just very much an employer-centric point of view when we really want to support our people in their own growth, because that's how those new skills are acquired.
If I was an HR manager listening to us now, I would be maybe getting a bit nervous, thinking, well, am I really one of those high performers, or am I rather a laggard? I really have to look into that study. And I have good news for those guys, because we will put the link obviously in the show notes so everybody can have a look at the full study, obviously. But then secondly, I would ask you, Mike, okay, if I'm maybe here in the laggard part or in the mid, somewhere in the middle.
We call them the average. Yes.
The average, maybe. Yes. Thank you. But I want to get to those who are really high performers. Where would I start? Like, where do I start? What do you recommend?
Well, in the report, and I encourage you to go look at the report, there are 5 things. So the first thing we recommend is don't think you're going to do one thing. Do a few things together that have an impact. Yeah. But there were 2 others that I teased out. So the 5 things in the report were focusing on future skills. 82% of employees in high-performing organizations felt like the company had their back for that. Integrate skill building, make sure you have good content, adopt an internal first hiring mindset, and create a culture of skill building. Employees in high-performing organizations feel like the organization took responsibility for that. But there were 2 other things that I like to call out. And the first one was that 96% of employees in high-performing organizations felt like the organization allowed them to explore interests, not just directed, but allowed them to create skills around their interests. Laggard did not. The other one that's even, to me, more important was 80% of employees in high-performing organizations felt like stretch assignments were a part of their careers, and only 37% in laggard organizations, which means they probably don't have a stretch assignment program. So those 2 things allow them to look at their interests in their growth and allow them to have stretch assignments as a part of that, along with the other 5 benchmarks that we call out in the report, I think is a good starting point.
So that sounds a lot like a high performance culture also, like always like going beyond the own comfort zone, I guess, right? Going beyond what I've been doing for the last year, for the last 2 years, and doing something different, something differently also. Growth mindset, I guess, goes together with that.
Agreed. And then think about the one thing that's dependent, and we've already talked about, on all the things that I just mentioned. First level managers, we want them as our multiplier effect. They're the ones that can help us do this.
Totally. And then you also mentioned, in a half sentence basically, but I think it's important for our HR listeners. You said provide good content. Do you mean like in intranets and to inform people, or how do you mean that?
Well, that question was really directed at the content related to development.
Mm-hmm.
So if I'm learning, make sure that that content is pertinent
Right.
and that it matches
Right.
what it is that I'm trying to learn.
Right.
Most high performing organizations looked to purchase content first so they could focus on the content that differentiated them. So
Mm-hmm.
rather than trying to create this whole menu of content, they would purchase content and focus their resources on the bits of content that differentiated their organization.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. So, well, we really covered quite some ground. Is there something, Mike, that we didn't touch upon yet? Is there something that struck you in the research process where you would say, well, this is really important for our audience to know? I
think one thing we've already talked about a little bit, and I am going to point out that we did it in one take. Good job, both of us, right? But the one thing that I called out about the high performing organizations versus the laggards is the high performing organizations have already started investing resources, dollars, time, culture, okay? Yeah. And the laggard organizations were looking at 3 to 5 years out. Pick a place, go look at the report, start with some of the things that we recommend about high performing organizations. Start now.
Yeah, we made a study last year, which was not so representative as yours was, but it has some meaning to it. And we asked HR managers, and we asked them about like how they were perceived after the COVID crisis. And most of them said, well, our standing as HR, it got better. Yeah, we've got a bit of recognition as crisis managers, and we did it fairly well. But then we asked also, did it change your budget? Or did it change your own resources, your personnel, your staffing? Yeah, in HR, no. Budget is the same. Not more people working for HR, but we have more tasks. So this is what they told us, and I thought that was really frustrating. Seeing, okay, we did a good job, and it was recognized, but what we got was more tasks, more on the to-do list, but with the same budget and the same resources. Is this something you would also see for organizations in the US?
Well, again, yeah, to some degree, yes, we're still seeing that flat, if you will. In HR during the pandemic, bless every one of you, because you were trying to make things happen a lot of times with what you could. But notice that what we know about high-performing organizations, back to the investment, is they've already started the investment. I would say that investment includes an investment in our HR people themselves. You all have careers in HR, and you need to grow your skill set as well. It's a great time to be in HR. Lots of opportunity.
So you, I think the next project you're definitely looking toward is talent hoarding. Is there something else you have on your, research bucket list, if you will?
The talent hoarding. So repeating this research, but looking, remember, I peel the onion on the research this time.
Right.
I'd like to peel the onion on the talent hoarding part. The other thing is it's very global in nature, but I'd like to take a little bit of an industry lens to it as well. So to be able to take not only the high performing organizations, but then we do have industry in here, but we didn't purposely set out to have representative industry. So that would be the other thing.
Right. Well, Mike, thanks a lot for covering that ground here on the study. I think it was very instructive, and for everybody listening here, I can just recommend really delve into the report, go deeper, and it's really worth it. Also auch nochmal für unsere Hörer hier in Deutsch, gehen Sie gerne in die Shownotes, schauen Sie sich das an. Wir haben alles nochmal für Sie aufbereitet. Mike, thanks a lot for your expertise, thanks for your knowledge, and thanks for delivering it. One take, right?
One take. Thank you. I enjoy talking about it.
Thanks. Yeah, it was fun talking to you. Thanks, Mike. And have a good day in Las Vegas. And I think it's going to get hot as always, right?
As always.
Thanks, Mike. Bye-bye.